couple of big rumors here to talk about. New MacBook Air with a big redesign, new iMac Pro with the 27-inch mini LED display, new Mac Mini, and I guess iPhone SE. So is there anything, Matt, in there in particular that's more interesting than the other, or should we just kind of go through sort of highlights? Because we've talked about this before, right?
We've talked about them, but I think the one that we haven't talked about the most is the MacBook Air. We mentioned that we know it's coming. It's a matter of when we did our buyer's guide, which, by the way, speaking of the holidays, if you haven't listened to that episode, we went through a whole buyer's guide for the holidays, not only for Black Friday, but any holiday that you may be buying gifts for, or just buying gifts or buying yourself stuff, whatever. If you want to get a good deal, there's a lot of tips that we have. So we have that podcast. It's a few episodes back, so check that out. But while we were talking about that, we mentioned maybe you shouldn't buy the MacBook Air because we know there's one coming. We've seen these leaks from many different sources, and they all kind of point to the same thing, which is basically almost like a mishmash between the iMac 24-inch, the M1 that we just got a redesign of, and the MacBook Pro. So that means we're going to get kind of a really super slim design with those squared off corners, almost like the iPad or the iMac, like I said. And then also we're going to get colors, very much similar to the iMac that we have now, and also white bezels. But then from the MacBook Pro, we're going to get possibly a notch and the new keyboard and those kind of things, plus all the ports like MagSafe. I'm not sure if they're going to have ports, but it's going to have MagSafe at the very least. But yeah, what else am I missing here? What are we going to see with this MacBook Air?
That's sort of all the big stuff. That's what we know is this big redesign. And what I think is so interesting about this is that I was thinking about this today. The MacBook Air, when it was launched in 2008, was like this very niche product. It was the thin and light laptop. It was this really great Mac. It was really expensive. It wasn't the computer for everyone. It was like more of a niche computer. I think that the MacBook, there was a thing called the MacBook, not the super thin one, just the regular plastic unibody MacBooks. I think they were, weren't they aluminum at one point? Anyways.
Yeah, after the plastic one, they made an aluminum one.
The regular MacBook line, that was like the de facto computer for everyone. So there was the MacBook Pro, and then the MacBook Air, which was sort of its own category leading device. It was thin, it was light, it was for the business traveler, it was whatever it was. That was a special computer. What's so interesting now and what's going to happen with this next-gen MacBook Air is that this is the computer for everyone, because not everyone needs the M1 Pro or the M1 Max of the MacBook Pro. And as of right now, if you don't want a MacBook Pro, your only other option is the MacBook Air. And how these rumors sort of point this computer to look in 2022 is it's going to be sort of the de facto computer for everyone. And you're going to get that new design. You're going to get the notch. You're going to get the better webcam, the mini LED display. You're going to get a really solid computer. And it is sort of interesting, just sort of in context, how the MacBook Air has become the computer for like the 5% of Apple elite customers to now the MacBook Air is like, that is the general Mac that I feel like most people these days get.
Oh, definitely. I mean, for a while there, when they did the redesign, not from the original MacBook Air, but when they did the redesign to the one that was around forever, I think they did that in 2012, maybe a little
like
before that. Yeah, I think it was 2012. Either way, it was around for a long time. And during that stint of that design and that computer, well, first of all, they didn't update even the internals very often, but that computer quickly became the most popular Mac, and I think even one of the most popular computers in general, like in terms of like a single device. And I don't think that's necessarily fallen off. It's just that it's not as exciting anymore. Like, it really seemed before like you recommend the MacBook Air because it's light, it's great for school, it's powerful enough to do everything you need for most people. But now it's like there's a lot more nuance in those options. But I agree, we're kind of coming back to the MacBook Air is going to be the computer for everyone. And it seems like Apple's trying to poise it as that, because it seems, at least in my opinion, that they're really trying to differentiate, I think better than they have in the past, between the Pro and the consumer, let's say, computers. These are all pretty much consumer grade, but like you get what I'm saying. So the home everyday computer is going to have colors, possibly going to have white bezels. It's going to be with the regular M1, M2 chips. And then you'll have the Pro line, which doesn't have the colors, but has the much more powerful processors and stuff. And I think it's just adding colors makes it so much easier to differentiate which one should you get. Because right now, if you look at the MacBook Air compared to the MacBook Pro, the M1 versions, not the new MacBook Pro, they look very similar and they perform almost exactly the same. So if they were very confusing for a while there, but I think now they're finally getting to the point where it's going to be very easy to differentiate. And pretty much now I know I'm not going to have to recommend my mom get a $3,000 MacBook Pro. I'm going to say get the MacBook Air and not even think a second time about it.
What's so interesting, too, is that Apple is very particular about their naming scheme. And now you sort of have, at least on the computers, a very clear separation between consumer and pro, like you just said, Matt, because there's Air and Pro. MacBook Air, iPad Air. Are those the only two Airs? There's no iPhone Air. There's no Mac Mini Air. But those are at least the two I could think of as examples. And then you have the pros on the other end. You have the iPad Pro. You have the MacBook Pro. So that's kind of interesting. And also, it was so interesting to see the renders of the new MacBook Air with the white keyboard, because that just immediately took me back to those original MacBooks. Remember the plastic MacBooks with the white keyboard on there? That also was a really good keyboard, by the way. I cannot remember Apple doing a white keyboard on a laptop since those MacBooks from like 2007, 2008, 2009. It's all been black, right? Now they sort of have the two-tone black color scheme on the MacBook Pro with sort of the keyboard in that sort of, what is it, like the keyboard well, it's all black with the two-tone of the silver space gray. And now you're going to have the white keyboard with the colors on the MacBook Air. I don't know, just interesting to see Apple sort of shift its computer lineup a bit. And I think we're going to settle into a nice space where you have a nice consumer option of all Macs and then a pro option of all Macs. You'll have the MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, iMac Pro, Mac Mini, which is sort of a question mark at this point, and then at the top of the mountain, the all-illustrious Mac Pro that will probably just blow everything else out of the water.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess here's a question. I agree with all of that. Here's a question, though. I don't know. The rumors point to it being a MacBook Air, but I'm not entirely convinced that this is 100% a MacBook Air. Or in the sense that maybe they won't call it the MacBook Air and maybe it'll be the MacBook. Only because, okay, on one hand, yes, the MacBook Air has this kind of appeal and this name recognition where even normal people know what the MacBook Air is. It's the computer that they pretty much want. But at the same time, it's like there is no reason for it to be an Air anymore, except for, I guess, differentiating it by name. But I don't know. I'm just, in the back of my head, I keep thinking like this is actually going to be a MacBook and they're going to go back to the MacBook and the MacBook Pro. Because otherwise, then why even have, like, why go straight to Pro? I don't know. It's like a half argument, but I'm just, in the back of my head, I'm a little convinced that it's not going to be a MacBook Air.
The naming scheme is so confusing, and I guess it's almost like, why did they name the iPad Air? But I guess it was just because it sort of fell in the middle, so now they're kind of stuck with it. The one reason I think that Apple wouldn't go with MacBook instead they'll probably go with MacBook Air is because, speaking of name recognition, not only does the MacBook Air have pretty good name recognition and people know what that is, I feel like the MacBook, ever since that whole disaster with that like weird low-powered Intel mobile chip one, maybe it's just in the tech community, but I feel like people don't remember that computer so fondly. And I feel like maybe it would cause more confusion if there was the MacBook, because then it's like, okay, does the MacBook Air still exist? Is there a MacBook and a MacBook Air? What happened to the MacBook Air? It's a little confusing as to what Apple would do, but I think it makes a lot of sense for them to just simplify everything and do MacBook and MacBook Pro, but I wonder, because of the blunder with that computer not that long ago, if it's just easier for them to keep the branding and the name of just Air and just kind of move forward with that.
Yeah, I get that, but I think that's mainly a tech community thing that didn't like the MacBook 12-inch. Everyone I know that had one in real life, like my sister had one. I'm trying to think who else. I know John, who we work with, his wife has one. or had one at least. And either way, point being, everyone I know who had one in real life actually loved it. It's just us who knew about computers realized how underpowered that computer was, and it was just not the best. The battery life, I think, was not very good, if I remember correctly. That being aside, I think the reason why they might go MacBook is because, well, here, let's lay out the line after these computers come out. So you're going to have the MacBook Air, this new version, the colorful version that's rumored. You'll have the MacBook Pros up top. So we have the 14-inch and the 16-inch. Are they going to keep around the cheaper MacBook Air, or not? I guess not cheaper, but the older MacBook Air as the quote-unquote cheap computer?
So.
You think they're going to just get rid of it?
I think they just got to, they're already in this Apple Silicon transition. I think the Apple Silicon transition has gone so well for them that maybe they keep some Intel SKU
the MacBook Air is already M1.
Oh, well, retract what I just said. I think they're just going to update it. They've just got to update it and just not keep the M1 around. I think they're just going to do M2. They're going to replace that, and that's going to be the beginning of the line.
I agree. In the back of my head, I feel like this is such a big redesign. It's such a crazy change that it would be. I guess the reason I'm saying maybe they will keep around the MacBook Air that already exists, the M1, is because they need the affordable computer, and this new computer is so different and so probably costly for the development and all that kind of stuff that they're gonna have to charge at least like $1,100, whereas now you can get one for $999 for the MacBook Air that exists. So it's like, it would end up raising the price, I think, unless they just put it at $999, which I guess they could do. But I feel like it would be maybe make a little bit more sense as the cheaper one is now the MacBook Air again, which it used to be, and then you have the MacBook and the MacBook Pro. I can see that happening. I don't know if it will, but that's just kind of in the back of my head what I think might happen.
I'd love to believe it. I just think it's too confusing for people who are just looking to buy a computer. But I do agree that maybe they need to keep that M1 MacBook Air around for the education market, and maybe they don't publicize it, but maybe they just sort of keep it as an off-menu option. Like if you're looking to buy 1,000 of these, you can buy the M1 and save a couple $100 per unit, which is not insignificant. But I don't know. There's a good chance that they could just change the name and just sort of abandon the MacBook Air line. But I think MacBook is just... I mean, I don't know. Apple's done some crazy things. They've brought back MagSafe. They've brought back different names. So I'm not going to say it's not possible.
PowerBook.
But I think that MacBook is it's not going to come back anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah,
so we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter here or there because the product is going to be the same either way. It's just a naming scheme. So the product looks great. I'm super excited to get this. Like, this is definitely a computer I'm going to be getting my wife, and when my parents need a computer, I'm probably going to be recommending it. You know, that it's that kind of computer where it seems like you're just going to recommend it to whoever needs a laptop and they want an Apple laptop. This is the way to go. And honestly, in my mind, if everything from the rumors is true, which we're going to be talking about rumors a little bit more in a second, but let's just say it's all true. I mean, it might even kill the iPad for me in my mind for most tests. Because right now, it's like when I want a thin and light laptop, I go for the iPad Pro. But a thin and light MacBook Air with this cool design, I don't know, might be speaking to me a little bit more.
And the M2 processor inside and a mini LED display. There's a lot of appeal with this laptop. I also think it's cool that Apple is bringing mini LED tech to not just their high-end products, but also to the low-end stuff as well, or I guess lower end. The MacBook Air is still expensive, but cool to see that as well. And I'm all in for the new design. I think it looks great. MagSafe's going to be there too. USB-C. Great computer for most people.
Hey, you made it to the end of this Apple Circle podcast clip, but there is a full episode. So if you want to listen to that, click the video over here. You can watch the entire thing. Or if you're someone who just wants to listen in your headphones, we have the audio version. Of course, links for that where you can subscribe and listen in your favorite audio podcast player is down below. And last but not least, the Apple Circle channel, where we have mini videos covering everything Apple, is also linked down below. So be sure to check that out and get subscribed.